All right, good afternoon, everyone. What we have for you today is an oldie but goodie, something that I did back when I was still kind of running things out of my garage. But we have a Springfield Savage Model 187 in 22 long rifle. It's an interesting kind of job. It originally came to me for the need to have the locking bolt replaced, and you'll see it come up here in a second as I'm kind of giving the rifle the once over. But it's actually a very pretty piece. You see 22s really get worked hard, in the life of of an owner. But I mean, you can look at this. I mean, the wood is still great, it's still shiny. It doesn't have the, like where the laminate comes off. But anyway, but look at this. So this is what I'm talking about. That's the lichen bolt right there. It's actually a plastic part, which is kind of absurd. I guess that's kind of like one of those cost cutting things. But through the years of use, the owner, it just snapped off one day. And this, well, I'll finish this. But you look at it right there, you see that's what it's supposed to look like. So essentially where that little finger hold is, about 3/4 of that just snapped off one day. And that's what we're going to be looking at replacing. But, to get back to my story, or actually let's go ahead and clear the rifle. It's hard to do there. You see, I said it was usable, and it was. But the, the problem was it was difficult to cock. And then not only did we have the issue of the fact that the locking bolt was broken, but the owner told me that it would light strike, every like fifth to seventh round. It was really intermittent. But the primary thing that they wanted done was to get the locking bolt replaced, right? To find a new one. And this will be in the description of this, but finding one was actually really difficult. Numrich Gun Parts is a great place, and they have a lot of hard to find parts, but couldn't find it there. Ended up finding it at a place called Jack First Gun Parts. I get the feeling that they make a lot of these parts there, but got one and was able to fix this. You'll see here in the disassembly. So you take out this little piece that I'm messing with there, and it's actually plastic except for the threads, which, again, that's interesting that Springfield Savage did it that way, but seems to be working. You'll see here that's the hammer assembly, and that the firing pin there kind of clips into the top. And that is a long firing pin. And, when I first started to take this apart, right, I noticed that the internals were dirty. But I didn't really think much of it. It was kind of like, all right, well, we're here to replace the locking bolt. That's going to be easy peasy, no big deal. But in the back of my mind was the whole intermittent firing. And I knew we would get to that point, but we're not really there yet. Doing this disassembly here, and everything looked good with the bolt. I saw a little bit of wear on the extractors, but not a big deal. And you can see, I run my finger across stuff or use a Q-tip here, and there's definitely some buildup. It's always a good thing to point out. 22 is nasty ammunition. There's no such thing as a 22 rifle that doesn't need a really good cleaning after every firing. And this one was no different. Everything was pretty nasty. So once it was apart, it was kind of like, all right, well, I was looking over everything, as you can see here. I was taking a really good look at the firing pin, and the tip, had some wear, you could tell. And then like the T-shaped at the tail end of it, was some definite mushrooming from where it kind of like clipped into the hammer assembly to be, essentially thrown forward, right? You can see me here like kind of assembling it back together to see how it all works. But yeah, anyway, what we'll eventually get into is we did a basic cleaning of it, which really involved just kind of scraping a lot of grit out of the bolt assembly, the bolt itself. I'm sorry, the hammer assembly, and then the bolt itself, and then kind of, just like wiping out everything and getting the residue build up. And then we were able to, at that point, kind of move back and look at what may be going on with the intermittent firing problem. I don't really want to kind of ruin the, the ending here, but, we will get to those steps. And unfortunately, this is one of the, like I said earlier, this is one of my older videos, so the test firing was not recorded. I went to like a pawn shop to do the test fire, and you're not allowed to record there. So unfortunately, unlike now, I can shoot at home. All right, so let's start to get into the overall cleaning. 22s are, I think I said it earlier. In fact, I know I did. I said it earlier. 22 ammunition is just, it's nasty. Long time ago, I had a Remington that I got as a kid, and my Remington touted that rifle as never having to clean it. Really, like, all you have to do, run the rod up and down the barrel a couple times, and it's good. Well, I don't know what engineer at Remington decided that that was legit, but they were, they weren't right. We'll just say it that way. But we're going to go through it here, and you see me just kind of, knocking the carbon buildup that's occurred, overall in the bolt. Nothing biggie here. Didn't do, I called this, in the services that I offer, I call this a basic clean. It's a field strip, we don't break the bolt completely down, especially in, some of these older weapons, because you never know what could happen when you actually start to go take things apart. But the basic cleaning service, we'll do the field strip, take it apart, and clean everything out, and then, of course, reassemble, and then do a function check to make sure. And you're going to end up getting two cleanings, because I'll clean it the first time, make sure that the function check is all good, and then, there's going to be a test fire to make sure that everything is still, working correctly. And then it ends up getting clean again. I'm not going to give you, a dirty firearm back. But like I said, you'll see me, go through, check out the hammer assembly. There wasn't really much to do there. And then we start to rod out the, near the chamber, and then clean with a wire brush, or actually mop out the entire, like bolt, the chamber area where the bolt slides back and forth, and then wire brush out the entire barrel to include the chamber, and then of course clean it out just to make sure that everything's good. The fire, like I said at the beginning, the firearm looks great, has a great bore. It's 22. To try and get a picture of it, without a bore scope is extremely difficult. So I tried a couple times. I remember but it just, it didn't work. But of course, when you don't have patches of the right size, you make your own small patches, which you'll see that coming. But yeah, it's a great little firearm, and it was I would say it was a nice, easy job, and I guess it really was. But once it's clean and is all done, and I'll go ahead and start kind of leading up to it. At this point, I was kind of wondering, like, was it really an issue with the firing pin? I wasn't 100% sure. I wasn't sold, but unfortunately, couldn't really find anything about the tolerances and like overall size of the firing pin. So did some research, dug around, and Numrich saved the day this time, and I was able to find a firing pin, in an existing factory one, and anyway, and ordered it, and figured we could go from there. So, and here in a second, we're going to get into the actual parts replacement and then the overall like reassembly of the firearm. But the first thing was I got the new one in. It was a couple weeks, time frame, from when I could work on it, and started to just kind of look at the overall, and amazingly, the old versus the new, there's only 0.003 of a inch difference, right? That ain't a lot, but it could be enough. So, I kind of went with it, and I was like, we're going to test this out. So the new firing pin just didn't quite fit into the hammer assembly. So needed to do just a shade. Of course, I ended up measuring with the caliper before, but had to do just a shade of hand filing on it, focusing on the edges of like the T-shaped fat end of the firing pin, while at the same time making sure that I didn't file away from the actual long like shaft part of the firing pin, because that's a long firing pin. I mean, and in the scheme of things, right? Yeah, it's steel, and yeah, it's gun metal, in quotations, but at the end of the day, it's long and it's thin, and if you weaken it after it sits there and gets hit a couple thousand times, something might give up, and you might end up having the firing pin kind of shear in half. So it took a while with the hand files, but was finally able to get it so that it would fit back in the hammer assembly, and and then kind of start to work through the whole reassembly process, which, I mean, in the scheme of things, it's fairly simple, considering like what it was that we were really doing when it came to this firearm, right? Replacing the lock and bolt, try to determine what the issue was with the light strikes, and then put it back together. So there's an important thing to note here, right, with reassembly, is that, and I want to point this out for anyone that's going to use this video for for reference purposes, is that the hammer assembly, the long spring sticks out and points towards like the I can't think of what it's called right now, I'm sorry, but the nut that's like holding the bolt and the hammer assembly and everything within the firearm. So that long spring sticks out and actually goes inside that nut a little bit. That's why there's a hole in it. And then when you reassemble this, you put the bolt in and you slide it forward just enough so that the hole where the locking bolt goes is visible. And you put the locking bolt in, and then there's a little groove across the top, and what actually holds the locking bolt in place so that it will not fall out of the rifle is the firing pin. So put the bolt in, slide it just enough forward so that you can see the hole, put the locking bolt in with the groove up, and then, and you can see what I'm doing right here, is you put the firing pin in the top of the hammer assembly, and then you slide it into the groove across the top, and then you screw it in. And hopefully, you can fast forward this and rewind back and forth a couple times, and hopefully you'll get the gist of what it is that I'm explaining. And then once that's done, you can see in the video, it's together, right? And then give it a little bit of lube, especially those extractors in the front. Make sure you put just a little bit of oil, and you'll see me doing it, and then kind of wiping the excess away and then actioning it. And of course, I put a little lube on the trigger mechanism to make sure that it was, a little bit more oily. Spread it around a little bit, wipe the excess off, and then voila, everything back together, functioning smoothly with the entire, brand new locking bolt. And then, we just go back into full reassembly at that point. Of course, like I said, unfortunately, I wasn't able to record the test fire, but I will tell you that everything was functional. Put about 20 through it, no light strikes, everything was great. It was a nice little project, and it was good to see a pretty 22 to get back up and running. Thanks.